Well, good morning, everybody. It's a huge pleasure and privilege to welcome you to the start of the second series of sessions at the 2021 Sporting Heritage Conference with a focus on education. And what an enormous privilege and joy to follow Danny with that amazing keynote. Because my connection with Danny, goodness me, goes back, I think, to about 2005, when we'd very much worked in partnership across a number of schools. And you can imagine the inspiration that Danny's story, Danny's sporting heritage had when he was working with primary and secondary schools to really excite and engage young people. And I guess it's some of the messaging from that inspirational story that helps to shape what we're going to look at this morning, thinking about our education programme, our education strategy here at Sporting Heritage, with lessons in partnership. Because what we want to very much do this morning is to amplify many of the key themes that were explored yesterday, particularly around diversity and inclusion, but to explore how we've absolutely done that in partnership and how we'll look to do that this morning in partnership by both engaging with some of our fantastic partners this morning, but also very much with you to help shape the direction of our future thinking moving forward. So it's my absolute privilege to welcome and be sharing the virtual stage this morning with our guests. They'll all have the opportunity to present and will be part of a Q&A together later on in the morning. But I thought it was very important to put some faces to names to start off with. So can I firstly introduce David Gleave. David, if you want to just say a couple of words.
Hi, that's me. Hello. Speak more later.
A lot more later on and around the inspirational work with football's Black Pioneers. I've got my copy to hand to show you later on. Here it is. Look, just to prove I'm prepared, here it is, an absolutely fabulous book, available in all good bookstores, I'm told, David, including Waterstones.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
an absolutely fabulous read and an inspiration, as we'll hear later on. Mark Foster from Berkshire Cricket Foundation. Morning, Mark.
Good morning. How are we doing? I haven't written a book, I'm afraid, and I doubt I ever will, but I've been great fun working with you on creating the resource around women's cricket, which we'll chat about later.
I think the resource probably seemed like a book from time to time. The amount of work that went into it, but again, a fabulous opportunity. Rhian from Rounders England.
Hello, hiya. Lovely to be here, and hopefully when we share what Derek and I have been working on, you'll see how enjoyable we found the process of kind of having the opportunity to promote our great sport that has a wonderful history and hopefully a very bright future too. So we'll enjoy sharing our resource with you.
Fabulous, thank you, Rhian. And I think you've hit on one of the absolute key themes there, that it's been a joy working together, and we're hopefully producing resources that are a joy for young people to experience and excite them both about the history and heritage of the sports that we're going to explore this morning, but also to encourage them to think about participating in them moving forward. So it's both past, present and future that we're exploring here. And last but by no means least, Ben from the World Rugby Museum. Morning, Ben.
Morning, Derek. So yeah, I'm the Museum Education Outreach Officer at the World Rugby Museum, and Derek and I have been working on some really exciting resources around women's rugby, and particularly in the lead up to the Women's Rugby World Cup next year. So excited to share those later as well.
Fabulous, thank you so much. And just to reiterate the fact that the opportunity to work in partnership with these amazing colleagues has been an absolute pleasure and joy for me over the 9 months now that I've been in my role at Sporting Heritage, and I think is absolutely the model moving forward in terms of co-constructing resources that will engage and excite our young people. So I just wanted to briefly think about a little bit around the sorts of resources that we produce, a little taster there from the resource inspired by David's Football's Black Pioneer, a focus on Viv there. The amazing cricket resource, and we were very, very fortunate, we'll pick up on it later, to have the opportunity to speak to some of the real greats of the women's game as a result of the fantastic connections that Berkshire has got with the women's game and shaping that moving forward. One of the most inspirational figures in sport I think I've had the privilege to meet, Dana Abdulkarim. Rhian, I won't steal any thunder around that, but an absolute joy to speak with her and interview her as part of the resource that we've produced. And the resources with Ben, I did call on my 20 years of headship experience as part of that. Caris Cox, who's in that picture there, is one of my former students, who's an England under-20 international and a player for Worcester Warriors at the moment. And we really wanted to incorporate, again, player voice, as we do in a number of the resources in terms of moving forward. So that's just a taster of what we'll see a little bit later on. Where does that then sit around today? I want to give just a very brief overview of how our education strategy has developed at Sporting Heritage over the last 9 months or so. The absolute focus on the role of partnership in shaping resources, because I think that absolutely categorically is the way forward in terms of creating capacity and really ensuring that the resources that we develop are meeting the needs of the young people, older people, community groups, and critically the sports themselves. But looking forward, what does the future look like, and how can we build on this model of lessons in partnership to ensure that we build an exciting future of resources at the same time? And to pick up on one historical analogy, the best way to predict the future is to create it. So let's look back to look forward, and the excitement that we've had over the last 9 months has been about creating a future of sporting heritage education resources. That isn't to say that what previously existed wasn't absolutely brilliant and engaging, but what we've really tried to do in terms of predicting our future is to think strategically about what our common themes are, what our priorities are, and how we can then put together a plan to ensure that they are rolled out in such a way that they maximise the opportunities for young people. So if I was to summarise what the intent was, and you can tell I haven't been out of teaching for all of that long because curriculum intent is really, really important at the moment. What's the vision? What's the thing that's exciting us? And it is excitement. It's about making sporting heritage accessible in such a way that it inspires, engages young people in the most brilliant learning that we possibly can. That's the vision. But you can also see that I was a teacher, because I then break it down into aims. We start with the big picture and then we move down into the aims. And there are some key words, I think, here that we're looking about sustained delivery here. We want this as part of an ongoing programme that will excite young people, older people, communities in learning. But that learning is innovative and it's thematic. Now, I think that's important. The fact that it's thematic means it can be flexible. And I think I learnt 2 things here when considering that overall strategy. The first was going right back to, I don't know, 2010, 2011. And I was involved then in the development of the London Get Set education programme, which was values themed. It took the 7 Olympic and Paralympic values. And it gave schools the autonomy to interpret resources around those themes. And that for me was really important as a school leader at that time, that I was going to be given the flexibility and autonomy, having been inspired by an initial suite of resources. How could I take those in directions that meant something to my community? So the flexibility and the thematic nature of the resources was always going to be important. And then once we found ourselves, in March of 2020, in a situation where we were looking at a new paradigm for learning, remote learning, hybrid learning, I think I became even more aware in the last, 6 months of my headship, looking at how my teachers were looking to engage and inspire and excite learning remotely, that you needed to think about the way in which you presented the resource. You needed to make sure that you brought flexibility. You had that inspiring start, that inspiring story, that video clip, that piece that then linked into extended learning. And hopefully what we'll see this morning is that there are some common themes that emerge from that approach. It's not about homogenizing the resources, but it's presenting them in such a way that they're accessible to schools, but can be used flexibly in a variety of settings, whether that's an assembly, whether it's a PSHE resource, a personal social development resource, whether it's a history lesson, whether it's a PE lesson, whether it's a geography lesson, an English lesson, to ensure that they can be interpreted in that way. So to take that slightly further, we want a clear, strategic, practical plan. We want that informed by partnerships and networks. And I think today's a brilliant example of that coming together. We're talking and we're going to hear from some of our brilliant partners already, but at the same time, as part of this, we're looking to build our networks with you this morning, both the sporting heritage as a whole, but both also with the individual partnerships that we see here, and the opportunities that that provides to ensure that we have a clear and increased volume of programs. And this key theme about ensuring that they are flexible and transferable across a range of settings. So within that, I think for 2021, we've had two really key priorities and themes, which are really very much the themes of the conference as a whole. The first has been about building capacity, building partnerships, building networks to ensure that we are co-constructing resources that have resonance and meaning for all partners. And that, as I said already, has been one of the absolute joys of my work over the last 9 months. And secondly, in building that programme of resources, ensuring that we are looking as broadly as possible, work around women and girls sporting heritage, ensuring diversity and thinking about inclusion in all of those resources as a core theme. But also, and again, I come to this as the former head of a specialist sports college, ensuring that the excitement that we generate about the past translates into the present and the future, and that wherever possible, what we are looking to do is excite young people to participate in the sports that they are finding out more about. So those resources, I think you will see from this morning, very much reflect those themes and priorities. So partnerships have been absolutely critical to what we have done. More on that this morning, but let's just give an overview of what those partnerships look like and how they will continue to develop and hopefully be added to. There's work underway with the national governing bodies of sport. Fantastic that we've been able to do that in a variety of context, and we want to continue to roll that work out over the next 12 months. And it may well be that what we want to do is use the inspiration of this first phase of resources to say to other NGBs, look at what your sport can do, look at what you can do with your artifacts, look at what you can do with your stories, your objects, look at how you can build inspiration based on these models, and push some of that back to the NGBs to say, yeah, we can see creative pathways ourselves. Of course, engaging with a range of museums, and it's wonderful, you know, to have Ben here this morning to talk about that perspective from the World Rugby Museum standpoint. Clubs and community groups, and the work that both Mark and Rhian will have done in terms of bringing communities together there. You'll see from resources this morning that we've already been working closely with the British Society of Sports History. I had the opportunity to present to their annual conference, which was at the end of August of this year at St Mary's in Twickenham, to talk about this strategy and to see how their expertise and resource could feed into our work. And particularly, we'll see in both the cricket and the rugby resource, we have the voice of some of the world's leading authorities in those areas actually being part of that resource. And that has come out of our links with the British Society of Sports History and the way in which those colleagues have very generously provided their time to support the resource materials that we've worked on. And also the Historical Association. For those of you in the audience working specifically in schools and in the primary and secondary context, the Historical Association as the professional body representing the voice of history teachers and subject specialists in the primary sector, the work of the Historical Association is really important in terms of building networks. And in fact, as we'll see in a moment, they have also been actively promoting our resources to ensure that they get across to the widest possible audience. So if we look at what's up so far, you can see the nature of the resource, but also this partnership pattern coming through. We have a resource that is very specifically linked to the Key Stage 2 history curriculum, the delivery of the unit on the ancient Greeks. And that's very much viewed through the prism of the ancient Olympics. I wrote the scheme of work for that in conjunction with the Historical Association. So we're ensuring that it's meeting the curriculum requirements there. And one of the things that we're noticing, if you're in schools at the moment, there are all sorts of decisions that are being taken around what does the recovery curriculum look like and what pieces of knowledge and understanding and skills might need to be rationalised. So what we've endeavoured to do there is to produce a really holistic resource. Hopefully schools will see it as imaginative, whether it's about designing your own museum display, making your own video, but looking at key points in the ancient world through the prism of the ancient Olympics. And that's jointly hosted on the Historical Association site. Privileged to work in partnership with the Yorkshire Cricket Foundation actually prior to officially coming into post at Sporting Heritage. And there's 3 units there that look at areas of resilience, team building, the power of community through the Yorkshire Cricket Foundation, powerful stories which I think have real resonance and relevance to the current context. I won't talk in any detail because Mark will do that far more eloquently than I can, but a joy to having worked with him and the Berkshire Cricket Foundation to see that work actually be launched on National Sporting Heritage Day in my old school, amongst others, was an absolute joy. Similarly, the work on women's rugby in conjunction with Ben, the World Rugby Museum, and also bringing in Worcester Warriors, again, brilliant launch in concert with National Sporting Heritage Day. But I think the power here, and Ben's been absolutely amazing, is what we have here is a suite of resources now that sit within the overall education package within the World Rugby Museum. A joy, as Rhian's already indicated, to have worked on a resource which really closely links to the sports values. And I think that there's a real power there and a real synergy between the resource and the way in which that will be implemented in a significant number of ways in schools, promoting a sport that so many people love so much and will have experienced. Football's Black Pioneers. I think David is one of the greatest supporters of sporting heritage, and certainly I was inspired by his inputs to earlier education webinars, and it's been brilliant that we've been able to turn the work that's inspired by his book into fruition. And lastly, and again, for those of you particularly in schools, an EPQ guide. The EPQ is the extended project qualification. It's worth half an A level, and a young person in a sixth form, whether they're doing maths, physics and chemistry, if they're inspired by a sporting story or a sporting theme, they can produce a personal research project about that. They pose their own question, they research the evidence, and they produce their own 5,000 word research project linked to a presentation. It can be an artifact, it can be a display. And we've actually produced an EPQ guide. The Historical Association have also promoted this with us, so that these young people can be supported through an independent journey to produce a piece of work that can be the difference between them getting into university and not. Anecdotally, a really strong EPQ can be the difference between securing that place at university and not. And there's a lot of significant work that we can do around that. The resources can be found on the education section of our website. And here you can see just a screenshot there. All of the resources that we'll talk about this morning are available there. You can seek more information from me via the Education at Sporting Heritage email address, and obviously delighted to talk through the implementation of those resources. So this morning is all about partners, it's all about partnerships, and we're delighted, therefore, that the next 40 minutes of the session is going to be in dialogue with each of those partners. And I'm delighted that we're going to start, and I'm going to, I was the head of a sports college, not a technology college. So I'm just ensuring that I've stopped my screen sharing there. So I've succeeded in that. And it's an absolute pleasure to start the discussions this morning with Ben Venus. Ben has already introduced himself as head of education at the World Rugby Museum at Twickenham. I think it was probably about Christmas time, Ben, that we first started working together.
Yeah, it was. It was about a year ago. I can't believe how long it was.
It's flown by. We've loved every moment. I know that. It's been an absolute joy, as we've said. We've been in really regular contact, and we've had some amazing experiences and continue to do so constructing the resources. So I really want to pass over to you, I think, in the first instance, to talk about your work at the museum, how you're engaging communities, and then we'll lead into the resource.
Super.
Welcome, Ed. Thank you.
Super. Yeah, so as Derek has already expressed, that we've worked together to create some amazing resources based around women's rugby. I'm going to talk to you about sort of the aims of the project, the outcomes, and some learning that I've personally found from working together. Maybe Derek has something to add to that at the end, but I thought I'd just give a little bit of context about why we decided to do it, how it came about. So as Derek said, we met about 10 months ago now. He sent me an email, was trying to get to somebody in the RFU, and it landed in my lap, and it just sort of yeah and it happened to be such a great time because we were working towards the Women's Rugby World Cup, and I was looking to produce some resources around this, so it sort of helped me to have somebody else to work on this project, half to take some load off of me as well in producing the resources, but also to have more connections and more resource available. So we've mentioned it's a collaborative project between Sporting Heritage with Derek and I, but there's also a key player in this, which was Dr. Lydia Furs, who's just graduated with her PhD in the brief history of women's rugby history. So yeah, she's been an absolute asset to the project, and I don't know if she's watching, but if you are, Lydia, thank you very much for all your help on the project too. So to start off, we had some project aims, and we, as Derek mentioned, we met quite a lot to establish clear criteria to see what we wanted to get out of the project. We knew our target audience were going to be teachers and students, but primarily these were going to be resources that teachers got hold of. We wanted to share the heritage of women's rugby. We wanted to link into the Women's Rugby exhibition that will be happening at the World Rugby Museum next year in January. We wanted to help promote the Rugby World Cup as well, which has been postponed to next year, to try and entice more young people to engage with the sport, and also hopefully encourage more young girls to play rugby too. And it was also a great opportunity as a museum to increase access to our collection. So prior to creating these resources and last year, we never had a digital offer here at the World Rugby Museum. At the start of the pandemic, it became increasingly important to have that so that we could still access and provide a learning offer to students. So last year I established the School of Ruck, our online virtual school, with resources primarily for Key Stages 1 and 2. But this project offered a greater opportunity to expand that. So Derek and I sat down, and our plan was to collaboratively create educational resources across the key stages. So we wanted to hit all young rugby fans from 5 years old all the way up to post 16. We wanted to make sure they were all really strongly embedded within the national curriculum, that they were relevant for schools. We also really wanted to make sure they were cross-curricular, so hitting multiple aspects of the curriculum too, not just PE, because as a sporting museum, I think quite a lot of teachers think that all we provide here is a physical education program, but we actually hit a number of subjects, including geography, business, English, etc. And we really wanted to showcase that within the project too. We want to make sure that the content was really interactive and allowing students to really take ownership over their own learning. Before, I think as museums, we're quite guilty of just producing sort of sheets and activity sheets. So we were really keen to make sure there was some really great video content there, and that this was all kind of student-led too. And as Derek expressed as well, that sort of thematic approach to the resources was really important too. So to sort of show the outcomes of the project, I thought the best way was to show you some examples, and we're going to watch some videos in a second as well of some of the great material we created. But here to the right of the screen, you'll see sort of a lesson plan. So these sort of lesson plans that we created for all the lessons, with clear objectives there and breakdowns of activities and timings for the teachers. At the bottom of your screen, with the title slide, Women, the Victorian Ideal, this is sort of the PowerPoints and presentations to help support those lessons that we've created for the teachers. And as well as obviously focusing on that sporting element, linking it into social history too, which was really key. And as a great part of being a museum as well, obviously we have that great heritage and all these amazing artifacts at our disposal. So at the top of your screen, you'll see that we've got a historic article there. So we're really keen to make sure from a history perspective, we're getting those primary sources and those moments for children to engage with primary sources and develop their historical inquiry skills. So here we've got one video with Dr. Lydia Furs, who we mentioned earlier. This is a great resource that helped sort of start Derek and I's look into how we're going to create resources around the heritage and history. So I'm just going to play about a minute of the video that was created.
Hi, my name's Dr. Lydia Furs, and I'm a historian working with the World Rugby Museum. Did you know that when rugby football started in 1823, people thought that only boys and men should play? So who were the first women to play rugby? Well, there's actually two candidates, both in 1887. A 10-year-old girl named Emily Valentine joined in with her brothers when their school team was a player short, even though girls usually weren't allowed to play rugby. Secondly, in Hull in the north of England, two women's teams played against each other, but the crowds were not amused and invaded the pitch before the game could be finished. While neither example truly represents the origins of women's rugby, both do suggest that in 1887, women were willing and interested in participating in traditionally masculine activities.
So that's obviously just a taster of kind of the resource that we did create and the work we did around that. But I think Derek and I were both really happy with the quality, and part of the partnership work, which I'll come into when I discuss learnings later, is that through sort of all our connections, we're able to get some professional people to create videos for us. We had sort of briefs, but obviously ended up with some really great resources that otherwise, without those connections, we wouldn't have been able to have. I also just wanted to show a short bit of some resources that Derek was able to get through his connections, some of his former pupils at Worcester Warriors. I just wanted to showcase this one as well as the older video, because I think what's really key when we're thinking about learning today is making sure those historical elements, and history is tangible and accessible for people today. So they want to see players from today and see how things have changed too. So I'll just play you a quick clip of this too.
Rugby as a whole has given me so many values that have like mirrored other aspects of life. So within like job interviews or university interviews, but then also working in teams outside of rugby, it's massively like respected in that sense as well. So I think it's like helped me massively in different aspects of life and not just rugby. Barriers as a youngster was more like opportunity. I was lucky enough to have really good opportunity at my secondary school, but also have obviously that great support network. But just the sense of like role models and stuff didn't exist when I was younger. So women role models in rugby, there was barely any of them around. So that was almost a barrier to like aspire to be someone. So I almost aspired to be more like an athlete, like a runner or something, than a rugby player, because there was just no publicity around women's rugby.
Perfect. So sort of the final outcome of the project, where did we want this to sit and how did we want people to access this? So a lot of the video content is all on Sporting Heritage site. And also we've obviously put it under the School of Ruck that I mentioned earlier, which is our online school. As you can just see here from the screenshot, we've got the different key stages and they're downloadable PDFs that are easily accessible for teachers and for lessons. The final bit that I just wanted to come to was the learning and the value of partnerships that Derek's really highlighted as well. So the first point here is the value of partnership projects. One, in sort of the networking and the connections that both you, Derek, and Lydia had, as well as myself at working at the RFU, has really been crucial to all the work that we've put together here. Also, just in terms of resource and having an extra pair of hands to create the resources meant that this project did happen in time and didn't sort of go on for years and years in hope to develop them. It's obviously great strength as well here at the museum. Probably bits that Derek didn't see is that we've got a team of 50 volunteers and some of them value themselves as professional proofreaders, which was really...
You didn't tell me that. I thought you did it all yourself.
Yeah. No, definitely. They definitely had a hand in helping, making sure that these were as professional and as slick as possible. Also, some learning included making sure that we built in time and potential costs for resources as well. Obviously, the value as well in creating strong briefs prior to creating these video lessons, because we sat down for quite a long time brainstorming before we even created them. I think it was months, wasn't it, Derek?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really key point. I mean, you were absolutely brilliant, Ben, and I think you also came from a teaching background, didn't you? And I don't think we actually produced anything probably for, I don't know, 4 months, wasn't it? There was a lot of iterative processes, and we really did focus down, didn't we? We threw everything out there, didn't we? And then we began to reality check it in terms of what we would be able to do, both in terms of the extent of the resource, but also what we felt would most effectively engage. Yeah,
no, exactly. One thing that we haven't done yet is obviously captured feedback for this. The resources have just gone live. I've worked in consultation with some teachers and some teachers have shared them. So that's kind of guided the process too. But they've not been used in the classroom yet. So I think that would be really interesting to still see what kind of feedback we get for those and how maybe we still need to adapt those, these resources, and maybe change them to just make them, perfect for teachers to use in the classroom. We want them to use them. I think as well, we did manage to use quite a bit of the collection. We've got lots of historical photographs here, and Lydia was really key in linking in bits of the collection that links to women's rugby and heritage. But I still think there's maybe more ways we could extend that in further projects. And a final point that I haven't really put here, but was really key, that I think we were really hyper aware of, Derek, at the beginning of the project, was that we were approaching women's rugby resources as two white middle-class men. And we were very, very conscious of that. So it was sort of learning, but I think it was a learning immediately at the beginning that we were like, are we best placed to do this? We need other people involved that have that expertise, which is one reason we brought Lydia on board too. I don't know if you've got anything to add on that.
Well, I'm delighted that you brought that point forward, because I think it really resonates with points from yesterday morning, in particular in the diversity conversation. And I know we've had that conversation already, haven't we, Ben, about what the next phase of development here looks like with a diversity focus, and ensuring that active voices from the communities form part of that co-construction. And you're right to highlight that we were acutely aware that we were looking at these issues through a prism. I think Lydia added a fantastic dimension to that, but there's clearly more that we can do. And I'm sure any insights from anybody that's listening this morning, we'd really welcome.
Yeah, super.
Ben, thank you. Thank you so much for that. So much to pick up there, and I think there will be other themes that will feed through. Joe, I know that you're asking for questions coming through chat. I think if you're happy, Joe, we'll go through each of our presenters and then come together on a collective Q&A, if you're comfortable with that. I'll take that as a resounding yes.
Yes, sorry, Derek. Yes.
No, that's fine. I'm monitoring the chat. I'm delighted that I've screen shared. And following the chat simultaneously is a huge challenge to me. So thank you, Joe. So Ben, thank you so much. And I said, what a joy to work. And Rhian. Now, there's another little bit of a connection that brought us together. There is a school theme that runs through this, because the chair of Rounders England is actually one of my former governors and wonderful parents at Parkhouse School, isn't she? Catherine Knight.
Yes.
Yeah. So there was a little bit of networking that went on there, but that's the importance of partnership. But I think from our very first meeting, and we met as a group of colleagues, didn't we? A number of your key colleagues at Rounders England. Yeah. Just the passion and the enthusiasm for the project that came through, and exactly as with Ben, you just thought this is going to be brilliant. So do you want to take us through a little bit of the journey and what the resource looks like as a result?
Yeah, sure, of course I will do. So yeah, as Derek alluded to, I kind of moved into Rounders England just over a year ago, and having been involved in education myself, knew how important Rounders was to a young person's experience in school. And I'm sure, like many of you have heard the phrase, I used to love playing Rounders at school. And that's very much kind of what it creates. And we are a very, very small organisation, but as Derek alluded, we've got a lot of passion as to the importance of Rounders within our community, past and present, and hopefully in the future. Our education story is that, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, Rounders was taken off the specification for GCSE and A-level PE curriculum. So we're trying to find ways in which we can continue schools to engage in Rounders. So this Sporting Heritage project is ideal, because it's not just through the PE curriculum, like Ben was alluding to in his talk. It's across the curriculum in many different areas. And we just felt that it was a great opportunity, because we are also at the start of a journey of producing our very first education resource as an organisation for Rounders delivery in PE from Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. And those kind of discussions progressed very rapidly, didn't they, Derek? Because we felt, actually, this is a great opportunity. We're both starting these resources at the same time, so let's make sure that they do connect. So I'll start to screen share and talk you through our journey. I'm not as fancy. I don't have a video embedded in ours, so it will be briefer.
Just while you're doing that, I mean, the resource itself has, we use Dana's story, don't we? And that yes. is a very powerful video. And I think Kev's helpfully put in the chat that the way in which you can access the resources. So thank you for that, Kev.
Yes, thank you. So as Derek shared, we have got some really strong education values, and this is where the discussions first of all generated. And I know that when we shared these with Derek, I think in his previous role as a head teacher, they really resonated with him and felt that actually these are really key values that we need to ensure that we're sharing in our schools. So as you can see there, it's fair play, respect, teamwork, winning behaviours, and it's about having fun too. So these are the key themes that we pull out through the resource. And the aim of the resource is, just like everybody else, and Derek shared earlier, was about introducing our values to hopefully a wider audience through the delivery of assemblies, through PSHE, through history lessons, through using other opportunities that aren't just through the PE lesson. Because very often sport is very driven down the PE curriculum, but actually we have so much more to offer across the whole kind of learning platform. And what we really wanted to use was to make that connection, to make it real. For those of us that work in the sports sector regularly, there's a very key theme at the moment of see it, be it. And that's very much what we want to kind of provide through not only this resource, as you'll see in a minute when we introduce you to Dana, is that we want to use those inspirational individuals that have been involved in our sport that can take our journey forward, but also highlight those values that we pull through the resource. So this is where we introduce through our resource a very, very inspiring woman, Dana, who Derek spoke about at the start. And Derek has, through producing these resources, had the pleasure of speaking with Dana, and I know that you found that really inspiring, Derek. But Dana to us was the first ever Muslim person to represent her country in playing a sport, and that's not only Rounders, that's across our nation. And again, through Dana's journey, she also became one of our England coaches, and again the first ever Muslim women coach of a national team. And her story is very important, and through the resource we talk about those key values that we've just mentioned and how Dana's journey has reflected that, because it's not an easy journey that she has taken, and she's very, very honest throughout the video that we share. So embedded in the resources is a video that Dana talks about her story, and it's not just about Rounders, it's about how her culture has impacted and how she's used it to drive herself forward. And Derek, I know through your chat with Dana, is there anything that you would like to kind of share that you found inspiring? Because I work with Dana on a very regular basis, but for you coming in as an outsider, how did you find those conversations, and how you kind of thought, wow, we need to incorporate her into these kind of well, I suppose really it's questions and challenges that we pose through the resources, isn't it? But we've utilised, saying, okay, so using Dana's journey, how do you think she represents these values, and how did you find that she did?
Well, I mean, wow was one of the words that came into my head. I mean, it was absolutely brilliant, and as you said there, it was the connect between her story and then the values that Rounders are articulating and embodying, and it gave it. I think there was the authenticity and integrity of the story here, because here you had a personification and embodiment of turning those aspirations into a reality. I think the other thing very much, I mean, Dana she's currently an assistant head teacher in a school as well, and I think the inspirational messages that she's able to share and to shape for that younger audience is very, very powerful indeed. And I think we come back to that theme again. You could use Dana's story in any context at all. It's an assembly in its own right. I'm not saying take it out of the Rounders context, but you could. You could look at it in this personal development context. You could look at it in terms of the citizenship curriculum. It can be used with an A-level audience. It can be used as part of careers development. I think that's the real power. and how this particular resource connected in this way. And I think there's also a real resonance here with the rugby resource as well, which is about rugby's values and around, you know, where you are shaping the resource and the approach in this way. It gives us this universality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of starting with Dana's journey and how important those values are really sets the story for it. That's going to be for us as a sport a very, very important part of our history and what Dana has produced, and kind of leading to the future. Dana is very much that kind of person who we're going to ensure that Muslim women you know, are inspired by her and go out there and play in kind of increase that level of participation for that community. But we kind of start with Dana's journey in the resource, reflect on her values, and then we go back through the history. So I know that Derek had great fun tracking back and finding exact historical examples of kind of challenging the young people through the curriculum resource of, okay, so what do you think? So there's this diagram, it looks a little bit like rounders, but you know, what could it be? Because actually rounders didn't have their very first rules established, and that was by the Gaelic Association in 1844. But actually there's so many historical articles before that that allude to a sport that looks very much like rounders. So we utilise that resource to kind of challenge the young people as to how they could use that example to interpret how rounders has kind of progressed. And then we do have some very exciting kind of bits of information that's Derek's found that in Jane Austen, it's alluded to a game that's very similar to rounders. So we've used some very interesting historical pieces to kind of create that journey from where we potentially think rounders has been kind of started as an informal activity to now the current day where we have a formal association, a national governing body, Rounders England, rules England squads. So it kind of fits a really, really lovely journey, I think, from my perspective, and I know that teachers will be able to utilise this resource to engage young people that might not necessarily find some of those sports that they find intimidating, that actually that they find a sport that is something that they feel comfortable in playing, and that's really what this resource is all about. It's about engaging young people and saying, okay, actually there is a sport that I do relate to and I really love that story, where can I do that and how can I do that? And that's where it's kind of our journey takes us to where we've created our kind of PE resource too. So we've made sure that we've not officially launched our PE curriculum, and when we do, we want to make sure that we do that in conjunction with the sporting heritage resource to say, look, the two complement each other. And our kind of PE resource for Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 reflects the values. So I'm going to stop sharing now because that's just an example of what our kind of curriculum sheets look like. So I can just continue talking.
I think they're Rhian. No, not at all. And I think where you sort of segued that, I've seen there's a question which I'm sure we'll discuss as a panel later come in from Dev, which is how do we ensure that sporting heritage is more readily seen as a way of engaging learners by those working education? And I think you've beautifully illustrated that there in that link between the sporting heritage resource and how you will then link that into the work that the PE practitioners, might engage with.
Yeah, that's it. I think what we'd really like to do is that, like, through the sporting heritage resource, we kind of talk and reflect, don't we, about how that young person can reflect some of those values. And actually our PE resource, because on every activity, not only is it linked to the PE curriculum, but we link it to the values. So if we're looking at the value of teamwork or respect, utilising those cards and those activities whereby we have a values captain that is kind of orchestrating, leading and identifying those respect values through that lesson, straight away you have a practical activity linked to the theory of it. And for me, that feels really comfortable, and it's a really useful resource for a school, a whole school across the curriculum. So there's practical and kind of theory based that complement each other. So it's something that we're really, really proud of. And I think to have the two resources together, and this being our inaugural one, I think it's a very, very strong resource for schools. I certainly wish I'd had it when we were working in schools.
Well, it's been a joy to, you know, to share that journey so far, and hopefully we can continue to do so in terms of moving, you know, both of our organisations forward. And just, I think, seeing what you've presented there in the context of what Ben had to say, hopefully everybody that's listening to us this morning, you know, can begin to think about some of the questions and some of the common themes that are beginning to emerge. Rhian, thank you so much, and we'll look forward to you joining us just in about sort of 15-20 minutes when we bring everybody back together. David, welcome.
Hi.
As I said in the introductory comments, I think you have been my greatest supporter in every one of the education webinars that I've undertaken. And I think in every one of those webinars or after them, we've had a conversation. And rather like, you know, both Rhian and Ben have indicated, what we've done is turn those words into actions, which has been fantastic. And we haven't hung about either, have we? So I'll pass over to you to obviously talk about Black Pioneers and then the journey into the resource.
Yeah, okay. I mean, thanks for the opportunity. This, for me, the journey goes back to 2016 when a friend of mine just approached me out of the blue and said he had an idea. Why didn't we try and find out who had been the first Black player at each of the 92 Football League clubs? To be honest, I think to start with, it was just something that we were doing for fun to entertain ourselves. But once we got halfway through the project, I think we began to realize that we were uncovering some really interesting stories and that there was probably the makings of a book here. So it didn't start out as a book, but it ended up as a book, and we were lucky enough to find a publisher. The result is the book, The Football's Black Pioneers. But for me, the book is sort of the end of the beginning, because as we got to the end of the process of producing the book, it occurred to me more and more that some of the stories we'd uncovered had a really strong educational value, and that actually what we should be doing was taking those stories and helping teachers to use them to present their class to their classes. So if we perhaps start just by putting up the book cover, because that, if you like, that's the end of the first stage of the journey, and I think that's the first slide, if I remember rightly, the book cover.
Just bear with me, David. I'm having a few difficulties, but I will endeavour to do my best.
Okay,
I know. Plan B. We don't want to get to Plan B in any context, do we? But there is a Plan B, and I'll have a go at sharing if there's a problem, Joe.
Okay, I'll carry on. So really, the book was important for us, but my interest and Bill's interest, we're both football fans. So we approached it as football fans, but we both have a strong interest in Black history. My wife is Black, we have 3 mixed heritage children, and we've always thought it was very important for us as parents to make sure that they understood their history, both from the white perspective, which we felt pretty confident they get in school, but also from the Black perspective, which we didn't think they would get in school so much. So that's where I'm coming from with this. And as we produced the book, as I say, it was obvious that we'd produced something that was of value beyond just football. And I was really pleased with some of the reviews we've got where they made that point. They said, this isn't just about football, this book is actually about the Black British experience for the last 130 years. And that is actually the message I wanted to get, because I'm particularly interested in this from a history point of view. So there's the cover of the book. And as I say, that is the end of the beginning for me. And what we've done is take that and try and turn it into an educational resource that can be used in schools. Now, before we get onto the Sporting Heritage resource, I just want to surprise Derek by saying that I've been spending the last 2 days standing up in front of Year 4 children, classes of Year 4 children, which as a non-teacher and somebody who's never done this before, I must admit I wasn't really looking forward to, and I was a bit terrified by the prospect.
I used to hate it as well.
But I have to say it went really, really well. So, I mean, I started each session by standing up and saying, asking them to put their hands up, who's interested in history? And you could see a fair amount of hesitation. Hands did go up and people looking over their shoulders to see who else was putting their hand up and should I put my hand up. So that was okay. And then I said, okay, so who's interested in football? And the response was very noticeably different. It was huge enthusiasm, lots of jumping up and down, saying me kind of behavior. So I then spent the next hour talking to these classes about black footballers, but actually also about a lot of other things as well. So during those sessions, we talked, for instance, about World War I, because one of our footballers had been in the army during World War I. So we talked about that. We talked a little bit about slavery, because one of our footballers could directly descended from an enslaved person. So, and we talked about racism in British society from the 1930s and how that's changed and what things are like now. And all of this was done with a group of, I think they're 8 years old, but we were able to work in other things as well. So somebody asked me, how old was this footballer when he died? So I said, well, why don't we work that out together? He was born in 1888, he died in 1918. How old do you think he was? And it was, for me as a non-teacher, it was a joy to kind of watch the cogs going round, and then the hands start to shoot up as they'd worked out the answer. And there were several times during those sessions when we were able to introduce a little bit of maths spontaneously. There was certainly geography. This player's origins were from Barbados. This player's origins were from Jamaica. What do we know about Barbados and Jamaica? What can we say about them? So for me, it illustrated what I felt all along, that these stories aren't just about football, but they can be used by teachers to talk about a whole range of things. I mean, if I could do that, I just thought, somebody who actually knows what they're doing could have a field day with this resource, because there is so much good material in there. And I'm really pleased to have had the opportunity to work with Derek, because I stumbled across his education seminars absolutely by chance. And I thought, well, I'll dial in and see what it's like, kind of thing. But I mean, it was almost immediately apparent that I had an education resource, but I had no idea what to do with it, how to get it out there. And Derek was looking for educational resources that he could promote. So it was kind of like a marriage made in heaven. And my desire to get the resources out there absolutely fitted with his desire to develop resources. And so the first resource we developed, I think if we move to the next slide, and this is the one that's gone live. I want to start with Viv Anderson as the first resource, because I thought he was an absolute classic example of a black footballer of the Windrush generation. Not just him, but his whole family, because his parents came over from Jamaica in the very early 1950s. And so if you're in school and you want to talk about the Windrush generation without making it obvious that you're talking about history, then introducing the subject of Viv Anderson and his family is a really, really good way of, I think, engaging children. Viv was the first black full England national. He made his England debut in 1978. So he's a really good case study. And at the end, I'll talk about some of the other footballers that we could talk about in similar ways. If we move to the next slide. Okay, I've sort of more or less said that. The Windrush generation, I mean, they've had a huge, huge impact on British society in so many ways. Football is just one of those ways. I don't think anybody would deny the fact that Britain looks totally different from the way it did pre-1940s to the way it looks now. And certainly for me, and I think most people would agree, Britain is a far better place than it was, thanks to the Windrush generation. So if we move to the next slide now, one of the points you can make, I think, is the way society has changed. This is the Nottingham Forest team photo from when Viv first signed as a professional. And I mean, you can engage children by sort of asking them to sort of count the number of black people in that photo, and it doesn't take very many fingers. There is only Viv Anderson. But then if you move forward to the next generation of Nottingham Forest players, or the current generation of Nottingham Forest, there is also another photo that shows the current Nottingham Forest.
Sorry, David. Yeah, there's a contrast, isn't there? Yeah.
And it's just to make the point that
I don't know if you've frozen for everybody, David.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
I think you have to talk amongst yourselves, Derek.
You may want to go back in, David. And I'm not sure he'll be able to do so. He may not be able to hear me. But if I just continue where we go with this, I mean, there's as David has so beautifully articulated, there's the the exploration of Viv's and his family's story with a series of activities that look at comparisons and contrasts, but then take us very much into the present and take us absolutely to the European Championships, and poses a series of questions around continuity and change. What has changed? What further needs to be changed? Similarly, the resource makes use of videos in the same way. There's a series of interviews with Viv and other Black players to illustrate some of these key messages and some of these key stories, which brings us right to the present. As David was indicating, the next stages are for us to look at the stories of other players and what the book so powerfully does. And you can think about this in a local context, whether you're in Newcastle, whether you're in Norwich. The story of the first Black player is here. So if you're thinking about this from a local school's perspective, a local museum perspective, there's a story here waiting for you to explore in the same way that Viv's story is used in this first resource. Hopefully David will be able to rejoin us, and I'm sure we can pick up some of those themes in the general discussion that we'll have a little bit later. But given that we need to have him back, last but by no means least, I want to move on to Mark. And again, there are always connections with these things. I might not look old enough, but I could have almost have taught Mark, because he went to Parkhouse School. He went to my school. We didn't quite cross over, did we, Mark?
Not quite. I think we've missed out by a couple of years. So,
Becky Milne, who saw on social media that we were talking together this morning, who went on to be head girl and a teacher at the school, sends her best regards. And our other connection is, as I'm actually a trustee on the Berkshire Cricket Foundation, and because I was in a West Berkshire school, aware of the fantastic work that Mark and his team have done at the Berkshire Cricket Foundation. But Mark, I mean, obviously a little bit about your role with the BCF, but then all of this work. And I'm reminded of one thing. Ben talked about how we work together. And we pass work backwards and forwards. I think technical term, dumped quite a lot of this on you.
Yes, I mean, it was great fun working with you and creating this resource. I work a lot across the education and schools coaching program we have in Berkshire, and various other things that we tie in with that. And a quieter time back in sort of March, April, we sort of started coming together with some ideas about how this might work and how this might fit in with what we were doing, and the sort of different people that we could work with and develop this resource. I don't think we had a clear idea of quite what it was going to look like at the start, but it definitely evolved and developed through people that we were able to work in consultation with to bring together this resource. I'll chat a little bit about it and how we finished out and how it came along. I think the idea was really to try and link the development of the women's game from back as far as possible. Really, it's been really interesting listening to some of the other things around rounders as well, about the history of the game. And we were very lucky that a bit of work was really done for us, and we'll chat a bit about Raf Nicholson and how she has already had a good history of the game there for us that we could use. But I think that the aims that came out from the end, and maybe not the start, were how the game developed, then looking to people that are involved in the game at the moment. There's some really inspiring stories from people who have played really key roles in the development of the game, but then bringing it up to the present day and the really exciting opportunities for women's cricketers at the moment, with the 100 and professional contracts for the first time in the last 5 or 6 years. So looking forward to that, and moving forward from now, what the future holds as well. I think one of the key things that we were both really keen to have on the resource was getting involved in the game as well. It was great to learn about the history of the game and the opportunities in the past, but really how girls can get involved in cricket moving forward. It's a massive piece of work that we do at the foundation in terms of creating opportunities for girls to play cricket, creating women and girls sections across the county. So having that as a key theme running through the resource was really important for us as well. I think the three key parts and the key elements were really the history of the game. So Raf Nicholson, who's a leading historian and journalist around women's cricket and a current lecturer at Bournemouth University, was really great in helping us sort of draw on all her resource and the work that she's done, the book she's written, to give us a really good history of the game, dating all the way back to the roots back in the 1800s, bringing it through the professionalisation through to the present day. It was a brilliant bit of work she'd done, and we kind of just stole it and used it in our own way in many ways, but a really good bit of work from Raf, and it was great thanks to her for everything she did along that. I think the second big part was bringing on board some famous cricketers, if you want, some inspirational figures from the past. Been lucky enough to work with Charlotte Edwards for a number of years now on different projects through schools, but through performance stuff as well. And Charlotte's always very willing to give her time and help out with anything that promotes and supports women's cricket and women's sport. A brilliant interview with her around her getting into the game and how different it was when she was growing up, a very similar age to me. So the parallels and different things that were going on back in the 90s when she was starting playing cricket, and her career to become one of the greatest women's cricketers to ever play, and a really inspirational story from her. So again, many thanks to Charlotte for her contribution along those lines. And then sort of moving forward to Lauren Bell. Lauren, a Berkshire born and bred cricketer who's represented Berkshire at all the age groups and has become a professional for the Southern Vipers and now the Southern Brave in the new 100 competition. Lauren participated in many of the programs that we've run over the last 10 years as well. So it was great to have her input in terms of a local knowledge in many ways, growing up playing schools cricket in Berkshire and really giving that real clear.
What's wrong with her? She didn't go to Park House.
She played against Park House on many occasions in different sports, I'm sure. But no, it's great just for girls to be able to see the opportunities that are now available. Lauren, a professional, fully professional cricketer, getting the opportunity to play all around the world, hopefully to play for England very soon as well, which I'm sure will happen. But really good to see that those opportunities do exist. A quick video and Lauren and Charlotte were put together for us as well.
Hi, we're Lauren Bell and Charlotte Edwards representing Southern Brave in the 100. We love cricket because it's a great game and we love being part of the team. I hope you've enjoyed learning about the history of the women's game.
You want to try some cricket, get down to your local cricket club or badger your teacher at school to play the game, or you can watch Lauren play in the 100 over the next few weeks. Hope you get involved.
I think it was one of the great things that came together, and it was, as we said, the sort of resource did evolve as we were going along, and the sort of uptake of the 100, and I think that the excitement around the game and the sort of opportunities that presented for women's cricket was fantastic, and for Lauren to have a key part in that and a starring role in so many of the games was fantastic, and obviously Charlotte coaching the Southern Brave side as well. So to really bring that to the real life and bring it right up to date, it was a brilliant sort of coming together of those bits and pieces. And again, I thought the day might never end that we got to launch the resource and use it for the first time, but eventually bring it all together on Sporting Heritage Day. And as Derek mentioned earlier, launching the resource and running the assembly with Beth Morgan and Verity Johnson, two of my colleagues from the Berkshire Cricket Foundation, going into Park House School and sitting in an assembly with girls who are really engaged and interested to learn about the game was fantastic. So hopefully the first of many opportunities for this resource to be used across not just Berkshire, but across the country.
Mark, thank you so much. And Mark very, very modestly played a central role in putting the whole of that resource together, and his technical expertise. And I'm sure, I don't know whether the Berkshire Cricket Foundation are prepared to lend him out, but his ability to put together a resource was second to none in terms of how that came together. But the joy of actually seeing young people experiencing that real time on Sporting Heritage Day was absolutely fantastic. And I think the common theme there, as you said, we didn't know exactly where we were going. I think we had a pretty decent view, but it was only really, wasn't it, in sort of early August that we were of the view that, yeah, with the success of the 100, this is really going to fly now in terms of.
Absolutely. I think when we started off, we weren't even sure the 100 was going to take place this year. So when it did, and the brilliant reception that it got was just a great sort of culmination and bringing everything together. So really exciting, and obviously exciting opportunities for playing cricket moving forward.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And as with every other colleague, an absolute joy to work with you. And I say, welcome back, David.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope I did justice to the last phase, which was just talking about how we were bringing very much into the here and now with the current issues and indeed opportunities in the game. But one of the points that I reference moving forward is that, you know, the book provides an absolutely wonderful resource where locally schools can take that model, because every one of the country's clubs are featured there, and there's a story waiting for them to explore further.
Yeah, can I just add I think, I don't know if I've frozen it. Can I just add a couple of points? I mean,
yep.
I think you and I have spoken, Derek, that Viv Anderson is potentially the first of a suite of resources, because, you know, for instance, if you wanted to have a women player, you could have Hope Powell, who was also, like Viv Anderson, a member of the Windrush generation. So you could bring the women and the girls into the discussion by focusing on Hope Powell. You've got Walter Tull, who served in the First World War, and he's one of the ones that I talked about yesterday. And I'm not a teacher, and I was really impressed by some of the questions that I was being asked, like, you know, why did Walter Tull enlist in the army in the First World War? I mean, that's a very good question coming from an 8-year-old, I thought. And there were other sort of very perceptive questions about how did people feel? How did Walter Tull feel about this? And so I think it does show that this is a resource that just generates lots of really, really positive discussion. So, and as I say, Viv Anderson can be the first of a whole suite, I think, because there's lots of other players we could focus on. But I'll stop there because I know time is short.
No, and I think that's absolutely right, David. And again, I think there's another synergy there with what Ben opened with. This is a part of a suite of resources if we take things forward. And one of the questions which we'll come to as a panel in a moment also is, I think, around how we're making these connections, and are some parts of the curriculum harder to access. But if you're looking at a skill there like empathy, which is one of the ones when I was a teacher of GCSE and A-level history, goodness me, that's ancient history when I was still delivering that. But those are exactly the sorts of questions that would have been further explored. So if I just, before we move into the panel discussion, if I can just let's just pull up my final observations based upon those brilliant contributions, and thank you. I've been in many of these, and to have 4 expert panelists contributing so powerfully and so succinctly in the time frame, particularly when they have a waffly introduction from the host, is absolutely stunning. So thank you. Just some things that come out for me. I think story is stimulus, the power of those stories, the flexibility for schools and organisations to be able to apply those resources in a variety of contexts, and that connectivity with young people, the voices that are coming through, and then hopefully, as we see, making those connections and leading further through. So really, the remaining 20 minutes is about opening up to discussion across us all as a whole. What are the future partnership opportunities? What, as delegates at the conference, are your ideas, your inputs, your questions? So I'll stop sharing and we can all come back together. Joe, can I rely on you a little bit initially? Are there any questions that immediately jump out to you that we should be looking at? I'm scanning at the same time.
There's a good one from Fran, Derek, which asks whether the panellists found some parts of the curriculum harder to make links with than others. What tested their creative skills the most when they were developing resources?
Who'd like to? Ben, do you want to come in first?
I can try. So the first part was, sorry, could you just repeat that again, Joe?
Areas of the curriculum, we've looked at this thematic cross-curricular approach. Mm-hmm. Are there particular areas of the curriculum that you did address that were hard to do so? Or I guess to extend that question, and others can pick up on it, and I'm happy to comment as well. Are there some areas that you haven't been able to access or engage?
Yeah, I think we tried to be as cross-curricular as possible, but I think given the themes that we had, there probably were some limitations. So probably easiest to start with what was easiest. So naturally, because we're dealing with heritage history, was really easy to hit in the curriculum. English, because there's always that storytelling element. There's that element of citizenship as well, active participation. That was really easy. I think I did maybe see something in the chat for somebody else. Some bits like of the curriculum, like maths and science, can be harder. it definitely is possible with sport, because parts of the education program I've built here around diet, nutrition, for example, biology, the biomechanics of sport as well. But I think because we were particularly looking at the brief heritage in the theme that we approached it with, it was quite difficult to, there's obviously not many records of what they ate back in 200 years ago. So I'd say some elements like that are trickier, but it is possible if you're looking more broadly at the sport to build it in. I think maths was one of the points raised, if I did see that in the chat as well, and I've created some sheets around sort of looking at kicking conversions and angles that are created. That's looking at that side for mathematics, looking at the side of sort of different size pitches and measurements, perimeter, use of area. So I think if you approach the sport from all the different kinds of angles and all the different areas, it's possible to hit those. But within this project, that was quite difficult to hit those areas of the curriculum.
I'll just pick up, sorry, you may have noticed that animal husbandry can be picked up as well as a sporting heritage theme, as I removed the cat. I do apologise for that. No, I think David picked up, and in fact in the Black Pioneers resource, there's some really interesting statistical analysis there and movements and different numbers of games. I'm also, it's interesting. I mean, cricket might be a particularly interesting one there in terms of, I guess, design technology as well, kit development, kit evolution. You can begin to think about some of those areas. But I think you're really right to flag those as a starter, Ben. Does anybody else want to come in on those curriculum links or curriculum challenges? Mark, are you unmuted?
Yeah, I think it is always very challenging to hit all the different areas of the curriculum. I think we've been quite lucky in the past working through cricket with another charity, Chance to Shine, who have developed a brilliant sort of cross-curricular set of resources that are available for schools to use. That I think if you delve down deep enough, you can find a link with different areas of the curriculum, however tenuous at times. But I think with maths and as you're right around technology and things, cricket is an obvious opportunity to sort of share some of those things.
Could you put the Chance to Shine link up, or perhaps we could share it with with colleagues in due course, because there are some really brilliant resources there, aren't there?
Yep.
And in fact, we did lean there in some respects as well. That's fantastic. Anything, Rhian, David, did you want to come in?
Well, all I was going to say, for me, it was all difficult because I'm not a teacher. I've got no teaching background. So I relied on my wife to prompt and nudge me in the right direction. And also later on you, Derek, to kind of draw me into the right directions. I'd say maths, I was quite surprised how much maths I was able to get into the sessions I did with the 8-year-olds over the last couple of days. And certainly there are opportunities with distances traveled, for instance, the Windrush generation, how many thousands of miles did they travel to come here? How many miles did Viv Anderson travel during his career, moving from club to club? So there are ways in which you can draw maths in, I think. And obviously football, you could talk about nutrition. I don't think the resource talks about nutrition at the moment, but the sorts of foods people eat will have changed dramatically from when the Windrush generation arrived to now, the choice that's available. So it was all difficult for me, but I hope we've managed to tick at least a few of the boxes with the results we produced.
David, if I had my time again, I'd have been recruiting you years ago. I have to say, I don't know. I mean, Rhian as well. I was specifically going to ask you to come in, but I was just thinking about some of those historical sources that we use, and they could, you could have said, well, actually, that's from the medieval period. I just wonder whether you could then say, well, I wonder what they might have been eating. How other ways might they have engaged? How many years ago was that? Sorry, Rhian, but you come in on any thoughts that you've had.
Yeah, no, I've also kind of, as I've been listening to the stories as well, and I think that there are elements of the curriculum that maybe we've not addressed, so when you look at the creative arts, and I know someone put in the chats, that they've got a resource for art and design, but you look at the creativity and looking at those artifacts and, recreating those, or in drama, retelling some of those stories. I mean, you think of the fantastic kind of journeys that some of the players that David was talking about, or Mark in the cricket, or Donna, and kind of the barriers that they've overcome. There are actually so many more other kind of cross-curricular opportunities that once you start to kind of broaden out, you think, actually, these resources could kind of go, there's opportunity for even more further development. Or the teachers, we all know teachers are so incredibly creative in how they interpret it, that actually it is open to interpretation, so they can utilise it in other ways.
I won't rub it in. I was at a conference this time last week in Nice. I mean, being online with sporting heritage trumps all of that from my office in Newbury. But I was actually I was presenting on one of the projects, and this would potentially fit beautifully in any project. So this was an art project where you got young people this was researching iconic moments from the Olympic and Paralympic past, but then looking at a match into a particular artistic genre or style. So if you think about Seb Coe in 1980, when he looks like he's screaming as he crosses the line, then obviously you'd research Edward Munch, and the young person would paint, Ben Ainsley's on the crest of a Hokusai wave. But there's a whole piece of research, and you could think about what are key historical moments from the heritage of a sport, and you could have an art. You could create a gallery around that. That it once you begin, and for me, as one of the joys of these resources that you've produced is, when you begin to reflect on them, you say, oh yes, we could take it that way, we could move it that way, which I think is absolutely brilliant. Aware that we got about eight or so minutes left of discussion. Joe, is there anything else immediately you think we should pick up on?
Yeah, well, there's one from Helena, sorry, who's asked about the educational resources, and is there something that helps to develop resources that we've produced, and so basically giving people a top tips on what to include, how to pitch to school curriculum across the nations, as well as an exhibition resource. Are there any top tips, or is there the gold standard of this is what you need to do, this is how you can do it, and these are the things that you need to include? Brilliant
question. Thank you for that, Helen. I'll comment first. Just from the short answer is yes. And firstly, each one of these resources has a teacher's guide to accompany it, with ideas about extension, where you might go for other links, how you might you might introduce the rounders resource or the cricket resource, or indeed any of the resources in one of 3 or 4 different ways. You might want a bit of music to go with it, whatever it might be, and there are suggestions. So hopefully those teachers' guides also are exactly that, a guide and an inspiration to how they might be interpreted, and a framework. But to specifically answer the question, yes. And I think what we want to do, with obviously the permission of these wonderful partners, is to say, here you've got some fantastic exemplars. What we will be producing, and the next stage of the work on the education strategy, is not necessarily to produce another 7 resources on 7 different sports, but to say, here are some of the top tips, here are some of the ways in which you might engage your resource. And I suppose the appropriate analogy is to almost to coach, is to say, to think about your resource, reflect on your resource, how might you develop that, and how could Sporting Heritage, how could our team of experts help you to move that forward. Anybody from the panel want to come in at all on that?
Well, I don't want to go on about my massive experience of 2 days as a teacher, but I mean, it was obvious to me that there's so much material there, and you could take it into so many directions, that it's an incredibly flexible resource. But what I would like to say is, if anybody wants to contact me at Historical Roots, the details are in the delegate pack. I'd be very happy to have feedback on if you've actually used the Viv Anderson resource, how it went, how you think it could be improved, and ways in which you think the resource could be developed. I mean, I would love to hear that. So feedback's very welcome from me.
Fabulous. Thank you, David. I think, Ben, you might want to come in from the museum perspective.
I was going to start with quite a basic approach, really. If you're developing an education program for the first time, the first thing I always do is look back to the national curriculum, which is easy to find on the government website. It's no matter how many times I look at it, there's always more detail that you can look into and find new things to bring out. So I always sit down with that and always have a theme, and then work around that and try and build ideas. Then I think what's important is to make sure you're not wasting too much time, is to work in consultation with schools, have some school contacts, sort of try those ideas out, and sort of make sure you keep doing that throughout the process as well.
That, I mean, a really great a great tip and advice there, because ultimately, you know, the curriculum's crowded, isn't it? You know, and schools are under pressure. So if you make that connection, and what you're demonstrating is this is a really fun, engaging but valid way to deliver national curriculum outcomes, whether that's in history, whether it's in geography, whether it's in English, you're immediately going to have the ear of the teacher practitioner. So I think that's really powerful. Thank you. Anybody else, or Joe, we've possibly got time to pick up on one more. I will just comment, Richard, and again, a huge supporter. Thank you for that comment about, you know, how we incentivise awards for schools that get involved. We've looked at that as well in the context of Sporting Heritage Day, and how I think one of our pieces of learning for this year is how we could lead into Sporting Heritage Day and maybe not lock schools into an activity just on the 30th. Maybe there's of September, maybe there's a celebration of what they do on the 30th, but looking at how they use some of these resources or projects, particularly perhaps during the summer term, to engage. Joe, have we got time for one more?
Yes, we've got one from Kev, which is basically saying, how do you ensure that Sporting Heritage is more readily seen as a way of engaging learners by those working in education and education leaders?
I'll just very quickly echo, I think, Ben's point there about making that connect where you can with the curriculum, because ultimately the day job is the delivery of that curriculum. So where you can amplify, expand, provide ways in is a fantastic way of doing it, and really promoting this thematic cross-curricular angle that schools will say, oh, there's a spark of an idea there, I can take it forward, I can move it. It doesn't need to be prescriptive, but you've inspired me there. You know, you've unleashed my own creativity. David's already shown that. Anybody else like to come in relatively quickly? Ben, are you?
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to just take over though, if anybody else wants to come in. So I was thinking more from a marketing perspective. And I think it's really, I'm really lucky where I am that we've obviously got really close links with the RFU, so our governing body, and having sort of that help and those connections has really helped make sure the heritage program we have here is seen. So whether it's through, we've got RFU affiliated schools, so I'm able to put things through their network and through their newsletters. Obviously England Rugby as well have been able to share some of ours, which is obviously reaches a massive bigger audience than we would just from our social media profiles for the museum. So that's been really key and helpful in reaching larger audiences as well, making sure those resources are seen too.
Fantastic.
I was just going to add as well, as with our resource, when you look at kind of the communities that you're targeting, it's also about finding those groups that represent those communities too. So we're doing a lot of work with a British Muslims group in the north, and kind of sharing those resources with those specific groups, because they've got contacts and connections that actually those people respect and relate to. So that's also another kind of avenue that you can utilize that's very specific to a certain group, but actually you're getting to the people that you really want to kind of speak to and hear these kind of stories.
Fantastic, fantastic. Fran, I think we're probably almost at time, with about a minute or so to go, according to my watch anyway. Look, firstly, just a huge thank you to every one of the panellists, to Ben, to David, to Rhian and Mark, not just for the last hour and whatever it's been, it's flown by, but everything that you've dedicated in support of Sporting Heritage, and most significantly the difference that you are making as a result of those inputs to so many young people's lives and educational experiences. It's been an absolute joy, and hopefully we'll continue to do so moving forward. And thank you to everybody for your wonderful questions and comments, which we'll reflect on and hopefully be connecting with you in terms of how we can create those lessons in partnership. That's where we began. Thank you so much. Joe, is there anything you wish to conclude with?
No, just to say thank you so much, Derek, for picking up when I couldn't do the presentation, David's presentation. Brilliant.
I'm more amazed than you are, actually, Joe.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference and look forward to continuing the conversations. Thanks very much.